religion remains one of the most powerful forces in the modern world. Billions of people structure their daily lives around religious rules, calendars, and rituals. Political decisions, laws, education, family relationships, all of these still carry the imprint of religious doctrines that were formed centuries and even millennia ago. Religion is not just a set of ideas. For millions of people, it's the foundation of their identity, a comfort in the face of death, and a moral compass. That's why talking about it requires not only logic, but also an understanding of the emotional depth of the issue. Today, I want to tell you about how religion can be dangerous and how it can also be helpful. So, we live in an era of unprecedented access to information, an era in which the scientific worldview explains phenomena that were once attributed to divine intervention, and yet religion hasn't gone away. Without a doubt, it influences human thinking and behavior. Every religion has its own set of beliefs about the nature of reality, the origin of the world, good and evil, and what happens after death. Built around those beliefs is a system of rules that governs everything, from diet to intimate life, from the calendar to the proper way of greeting someone. The first danger of religion is that it typically enters a person's life in early childhood. A child doesn't choose their faith. They're born into a family where certain ideas about God, the soul, and the afterlife are already firmly established. By the time that child grows up, the religious worldview is already deeply embedded in their psyche, which creates major obstacles to critical thinking. But even if someone later discovers contradictions in their faith and seriously begins to doubt its truth, that can lead to disillusionment and serious psychological problems. When a long-held worldview suddenly collapses, a person literally loses their bearings, loses their compass, and has absolutely no idea what their purpose is or where to go next. They thought they understood how the world works, what happens after death, and what the meaning of their life is. They had read it in the sacred texts and heard it countless times from their elders. But after losing their faith, they suddenly realize that they actually know nothing about the world they're living in. And that can be a massive psychological shock. It would be more honest, wouldn't you agree, for a person to make a conscious decision about what to believe only once they're already an adult? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments. The next danger of religion is its suppression of any doubt in religious ideas. You'd think that if a person questions the existence of God, it would be a sign of rational thinking. But within religion, that kind of doubt is often framed not as a mark of intelligence, but as a moral failing, a temptation, or a lack of faith. That is precisely why religious ideas are perceived as truth without proof. They're not meant to be examined. They're meant to be blindly accepted. Religious dogmas lock in a worldview with no option to verify it. The believer is never encouraged to investigate for themselves whether the world really was created in 6 days, whether prayer actually affects the outcome of an illness, or whether the soul truly continues to exist after the death of the body. These claims are presented as axioms, and any attempt to question them is treated as a threat to the entire system. Beliefs are transmitted not through analysis and comparison of facts, but through tradition, authority, and ritual. It's always been this way. It's written in the Holy Book. That's what the Church teaches. These are the main arguments that stand in for rational justification. From this flows a restriction of alternative viewpoints. In many religious communities, openly studying other belief systems or scientific theories that contradict a doctrine is either discouraged or outright forbidden. A person grows up inside an information bubble, where everyone around them shares the same convictions, and dissenters are either absent or portrayed as misguided, dangerous, or inspired by evil forces. This is a powerful self-preservation mechanism for the system. Religion's psychological influence is built on two immensely powerful emotional levers: fear and hope. On the one hand, the believer is promised a reward for righteousness, eternal life in paradise, rebirth in better circumstances, union with the divine. On the other, they're warned of punishment for their sins, hell, eternal torment, a miserable rebirth. Behavior is shaped by constantly balancing between these two poles. You do good, not because it yields real, tangible benefits, but because you're afraid of punishment. You refrain from wrongdoing, not out of ethical considerations, but out of fear of an all-seeing eye. A particularly important element is control through the concepts of sin and guilt. Religion often declares natural human needs and desires to be sinful. Sexuality, the pursuit of pleasure, doubt, pride in one's own achievements. From childhood, a person is conditioned to feel guilt for thoughts and feelings they never chose, and which are an inseparable part of their nature. This chronic guilt creates a dependency on the religious system, which alone can forgive and cleanse. A vicious circle is formed. The system creates the problem, then offers itself as the solution. In my view, one of the most dangerous aspects of religion is the heavy emphasis it places on the superiority of the spiritual over the material. As a result, religious teachings often regard the material world, while not necessarily dismissing it entirely, as something insignificant. The soul is treated as more important than the body, more important than money or anything material, and these beliefs are genuinely destructive in nature. A person comes to believe that they have an eternal soul and that they are that soul, while the body is merely a temporary shell. Driven by these ideas, people who have been led astray may take up harsh ascetic practices without sparing themselves, or even give their lives on the battlefield in the name of their faith, because, in their view, the body is essentially worthless. Such people are easily manipulated by the promise of eternal life in paradise. But here's the thing, heaven and the soul are fantasies. While your body is real, and you only get one, there won't be another one. Don't put off spending time with the people you love, and don't devalue their material existence. You're not going to meet them in the next life, because there is no next life. Furthermore, to put it objectively, religious beliefs frequently cause disputes, conflicts, and sometimes a contemptuous attitude toward people of other faiths. In practically every religious text, you can find ideas, both explicit and veiled, that there are them, the lost, the unfaithful, the foolish, the sinful, and then there are us, the righteous, the pure, the bearers of true knowledge. This creates a division between insiders and outsiders. Only our path is correct. Only our religion is the true one. It may not always be written in so many words, but the message is often there between the lines. Atheists, on the other hand, rely on science, and science is universally the same for everyone. No matter where you are on the planet, physics stays physics. 2 + 2 is always 4, and so on. And yet, people keep believing in the supernatural, despite space telescopes and the decoding of the human genome. Billions of our contemporaries are absolutely convinced that the world is governed by invisible forces, that prayer can change the course of events, and that something awaits us after death. One of the central elements of religious thinking is illusory expectations. The believer is encouraged to transfer their hopes for justice and happiness into an afterlife existence. Suffering in this life gains meaning as a trial or a form of purification. The world's injustice is compensated for by the promise of posthumous reward. The problem is that none of these promises can be verified. We can't confirm that heaven exists, that the soul reincarnates, or that evildoers will get what they deserve. These are claims accepted purely on faith. The flip side is the fear of punishments that are equally impossible to verify. The threat of hell or an unfavorable rebirth affects the psyche even more strongly than the promise of reward, because humans are more sensitive to potential losses. But unlike real-world dangers, this one can never be either confirmed or disproven. It always remains a possibility hanging over the believer's head. Beyond that, Religion often encourages people to shift responsibility for their own lives onto supernatural forces. Instead of, I need to take action, it's, God will handle it. Instead of, I'm responsible for the consequences, it's, everything is God's will. In moderation, this can serve as a psychological defense against overload, but in its extreme forms, it leads to passivity and an abdication of responsibility for one's own decisions. Religion imposes numerous restrictions on behavior and freedom of choice. These restrictions touch on a wide range of areas of life. In diet, you can't eat certain foods on certain days, or ever. In lifestyle, mandatory observance of the Sabbath or Friday, compulsory wearing of specific clothing, prohibitions on certain forms of leisure. In sexuality, rules about whom you can enter into a relationship with and when, a ban on contraception, condemnation of certain orientations. In social roles, the reinforcement of inequality between men and women, between different castes or groups, often justified by sacred texts. What's most important here is that these rules don't come from a rational analysis of their consequences. They aren't debated democratically, and they aren't revised when new information comes to light. They are given once and for all, and breaking them isn't just a mistake, it's a sin for which punishment will follow. Rituals and ceremonies occupy a significant place in religious life and consume substantial resources. Prayers multiple times a day, weekly services, pilgrimages, holidays, sacrifices, including financial ones in the form of tithes or donations. A person spends hours, days, years of their life on actions whose effectiveness, in terms of measurable impact on the real world, has never been confirmed. Money flows into building temples and maintaining the clergy. Mental energy is spent on observing rules and worrying about breaking them. These are all resources that could have been directed toward education, healthcare, science, and personal development. Religion can have a dampening effect on ambition and progress. As I mentioned earlier, many traditions contain the idea that the material world is to be devalued. Everything earthly is temporary and insignificant. The main thing is to prepare for eternity. The pursuit of wealth, success, fame, and comfort is declared vanity or even sin. This fosters a specific attitude toward achievement. Why strive for success in this world if the real life begins after death? In some denominations, poverty is elevated to a virtue, and material well-being is treated as an obstacle on the spiritual path. The consequences of this mindset can manifest in reduced economic activity across entire communities. The opposition between the spiritual and the material creates an artificial conflict. Science, medicine, technology, and art can come to be seen as secondary compared to spiritual life. That doesn't mean every believer necessarily rejects progress, but the very logical framework lays the groundwork for such a rejection. Religious environments are often accompanied by intense social pressure. The expectations of family, community, and clergy create a rigid framework of acceptable behavior. Rejecting religion or even doubting certain dogmas can lead to serious consequences, from emotional estrangement to the complete severing of relationships, expulsion from the family, and, in some countries, even criminal prosecution. A person can spend years pretending to believe, unable to openly express their views for fear of judgment and isolation. This is felt especially acutely in adolescence, when dependence on family is at its peak. Religious differences serve as a constant source of conflict, both within society and within the family. Marriages between people of different faiths still cause tension and sometimes open opposition. Children who grow up in religious families are often forced to hide their true views from their parents. The religious upbringing of grandchildren becomes a battlefield between generations. The impact of religion on critical thinking is one of the most fundamental aspects of its influence. I touched on this earlier, but now I want to flesh out the idea a little further. A person raised in a system where claims are accepted without proof, where tradition is placed above logic, and where doubt is considered a sin, inevitably struggles to develop rational analysis skills. They get used to a particular way of thinking, one where there is an authoritative source, and its word is taken as truth. This pattern can spread beyond the strictly religious sphere. If a sacred text cannot be wrong, then other authority figures may also be perceived uncritically. As a result, a person can become overly trusting, easily led, and susceptible to manipulation. Let me remind you that the difficulty of rethinking one's beliefs is tied to the fact that a religious worldview is holistic. You can't simply remove one element from it without questioning the rest. If you begin to doubt the infallibility of a holy book, the justification for moral norms, the promise of an afterlife, and the meaning of suffering all collapse. That is an enormous amount of restructuring, and the psyche defends itself against it by rejecting doubt in its infancy. The historical consequences of religion cannot be ignored. The Crusades, the religious wars in Europe, the persecution of heretics, the Inquisition, the forced conversion of indigenous peoples in the colonies, the list of tragedies committed in God's name is enormous. Religion has repeatedly served as a tool for the ideological justification of wars, conquests, and social control. It divided societies into the pure and the impure, the faithful and the unbelievers, the saved and the condemned. And although religious wars on the former scale are a thing of the past, religious conflicts continue to flare up in various parts of the world. The use of religion as an instrument of power is a separate subject. Rulers throughout history have relied on religious legitimization. Monarchs declared themselves God's anointed, laws as handed down from above, and rebellion a sin. This model has not disappeared today. In a number of countries, religious institutions directly influence legislation, and religious slogans are used for political mobilization. Criticizing religion under such conditions means criticizing the government, with all the consequences that entails. So why is faith so persistent, despite all the contradictions? The reasons lie in psychology. The effect of social environment and upbringing creates a powerful inertia. A person is surrounded by like-minded people who share their beliefs, and this constantly reinforces their faith. Additionally, psychological defense mechanisms against doubt kick in. The religious system provides ready-made answers to difficult questions. The Lord works in mysterious ways. This is a mystery beyond human understanding. Your faith simply isn't strong enough. These answers don't resolve the contradictions, but they temporarily reduce the cognitive discomfort and allow the person to continue believing. I hope I've managed to explain in detail the danger that religion poses to the modern person. Oddly enough, I do have some arguments in favor of religion. Although I am absolutely convinced that religious teachings carry no truth or knowledge about reality, I still want to draw your attention to the fact that not everyone needs the truth. Some people are perfectly happy to embrace a comforting lie. If I see a religious person who is doing well and whose eyes are full of happiness, it would never even cross my mind to try to convince them otherwise. If that person lives a healthy lifestyle, doesn't break the law, and is joyful, while simultaneously living in a world of made-up fantasies within some religious doctrine, then it's clearly not worth invading their illusions, as doing so would likely only cause them harm. There are plenty of situations where religion genuinely helps. For instance, take a person who is seriously ill and doesn't have long to live. If they and their family believe that life will continue, that they will definitely meet again, and that the dying person will always be with them as a guardian angel, believing this will genuinely help those people cope more easily with such a difficult situation. You have to agree, questioning the faith of people in that position would be an extremely inhumane thing to do. Not everyone is ready to be an atheist and a rationalist. For some people, it's much easier and far preferable to remain in a world of fantasies and delusions, but in exchange, to live a happy life where everything makes sense, everything has meaning, and everything has a continuation. It's no surprise that some atheists sincerely wish they could forget, could unknow, all of these rational arguments that prove God and the soul don't exist. Forget, and once again find themselves in a world where angels seem real, dreams feel prophetic, and good always triumphs over evil. If you're one of those people, then you should probably unsubscribe from my channel and start watching religious content. It may not be too late for you to change your beliefs, but for those who, like me, want to figure out how the world truly works, it's important to accept this. The truth is not obligated to be comfortable or comforting. It doesn't bend to our expectations and doesn't guarantee easy answers. However, it's precisely the search for reality through facts, doubt, and critical thinking that yields a deeper and more honest understanding of things. It's a path without illusions, but with far greater freedom. The freedom to think, to verify, and to draw your own conclusions. Thank you for your attention, and I'll see you in the next video.